Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my mostly stock career mode. Now today we're going to be doing a Munar flyby, but before we do that I just want to do one quick experiment. It's going to take 2 parts, just something so that I can control my craft of course, and a science bay. And all we're going to do is research the materials bay, because it's going to get us 7.5 science. And then we're going to recover it. The reason we're doing this is I saw that I was at 84 science, or 88 science, and because I was so close to 90, I wanted to get past 90, because now, if we go through here, and we go into the Research and Development Center, you'll see that these each cost 45 science, and these cost 90 science, meaning I can actually get these larger fuel tanks and the pipes. However, I'm not going to get this one just yet because I do actually want batteries instead. Because they're actually going to help me more than an engine would for this next launch, since we're going to need to keep our electric charge up versus just what we get in the normal command pods. We need to actually keep it up for this Munar flyby that we're going to be doing. And along with that, I'm going to grab these plane parts because I'm sure we're going to be building a plane. Probably not this episode, but rather soon, because I'm certain that there's going to be a contract for it at some point. Now, the contract that we're aiming at is, of course, Fly by the Moon. So let's grab that one. Perform visual surveys of Kerbal. This would be one where we'd use a plane, although it is kind of high for a plane, so we'd probably have to put a liquid fueled engine in there as well. Now, I don't believe we're going to be grabbing any other contracts. It just doesn't look like there's any we can really do on the way. Now we can probably do some, but I'd rather not force myself to work around them, basically, when we would just want to go to the moon nice and easy. So we'll close it at that and we'll just focus on this fly by the moon goal here. Now, flying by the moon is going to give us an opportunity to grab 2 types of science. And because of this, we're going to bring 2 of each research that we can. Now, the 2 types of science that we're aiming to get here is going to be both close and high over the moon. So we're going to get 2 thermometers, 2 science bays, and 2 mystery goos. Now, we're not actually going to bring these with us, or back with us, I should say. What we're going to do is I'm putting those as a placeholder. We're actually going to use this new part, which I really do like, which is the service bay, and we're just going to kind of stuff these experiments in there. Now, I'm also going to put the thermometers down there, just because it's a nice holding unit, I should say. Probably need to put those back. How about I finish up this craft and we take a look at it when it's actually built and ready to go. Now, actually, I've encountered a very minor problem, and that is the craft I built is a little too big. So we're going to right-click on our vehicle assembly building here, and we're actually going to upgrade it so that we can support more than 30 parts, because the craft I want to use is using 42 parts. So we're just going to upgrade that. Now, that is going to cut a huge amount of our funds out, and we're going to be left with not too many, but it shouldn't be much of a problem, since we do still have plenty of funds, and it looks like it didn't save my craft. Alright, so now we have the VAB upgraded, and we got our craft here ready to launch. We have a couple of Reliant liquid fuel boosters just for the atmosphere, as well as some of these nice large SRBs to give us an extra kick on the first stage, since the 2 liquid fuel engines by themselves don't give us a lot of thrust-weight ratio. We also have a nice, more efficient engine in the middle, along with the Terrier, and of course all of these science packets. Now, the reason we're using liquid fuel instead of just solid rocket boosters is because the liquid fuel has a much higher fuel density, or delta V density, meaning that this fuel stack, although it's about the same size as this solid rocket booster, it has roughly, I want to say, 2 to 3 times the delta V capacity. So liquid fuel has much more delta V density, even though it is more expensive than the SRBs. So let's launch this. Now, the SRBs are only there for one purpose, really, and that's because the bottom stage of this craft doesn't have a lot of thrust-to-weight ratio. So we'll turn SAS on and push spacebar. And these two engines on the side here alone, the liquid fuel stacks, they actually only give this thing about a 1.1 thrust-to-weight ratio, which means we go up really, really slowly. And going up really slowly means that there is more time for the gravity of Kerbin to pull you back down, meaning it takes a significant portion more of delta V in order to actually escape. So there go the SRBs. We have some very odd oscillation. Maybe that'll cancel out, maybe it won't. Now we do have these really massive tail fins, which I do enjoy using, because they give so much control authority to your craft. Meaning even though these engines don't have any gimbal, I'm actually able to control this craft rather well. Aside from the weird oscillations on the engines, that's about the only thing that's really messing with my control. So, with those boosters, we got away from the planet wicked fast, which means we still have about half the fuel in this stage. Whereas if we didn't have the engines, we would have burned through all of the fuel in these side stages before we reached this altitude. And that's simply because every second that you're close to the ground, just imagine yourself, every second you need 10 delta V just to cancel out the gravity of Kerbin. Which means if you're going to be floating at 1.0 thrust-to-weight ratio for, say, a 30-second stage, then you're going to need 300 delta V just to cancel out gravity while you try to accelerate. And in that time, with your 1.0 thrust-to-weight ratio, in 30 seconds, you're only going to accelerate up maybe a kilometer or two. Basically, you're wasting a ton of fuel. So the faster you can get away from the planet, the better off you are. Although if you don't have a lot of control authority, such as I had with my tail fins, then accelerating really quickly will lead to your vessel flipping and ending up crashing. Which is why I put these tail fins on, as to kind of control the craft while it's undergoing that huge amount of acceleration from the BACC solid rocket boosters. And from here, it's just going to be a normal orbit, basically, where we're going to get our apoapsis to roughly 75, and then we're going to go for the Munar encounter. Now, there's nothing different about this orbit than there was last time. However, this orbit, we probably don't need to go quite as high. We should be fine at 75. And I don't think I mentioned this, but the reason we go east or we go to the right when north is up, because that's the North Pole, and the reason we go to the right is because Kerbin rotates in that direction. So if we observe Kerbin from up here, now I still have to actually do this orbit, so I'm just going to kind of work on this burn while I talk about this. If you take the North Pole and you look straight down at it, Kerbin rotates anti-clockwise, just like the moon. And the reason we go east is because we have an acceleration, or a velocity, in the anti-clockwise direction of roughly, I want to say, 250, somewhere around there, meters per second. Meaning if we were to try and orbit Kerbin going clockwise, we would have to spend 250 meters per second extra just to cancel out Kerbin's rotation, and then we'd have to get our about 2300 meters per second just to get into orbit. So it saves you about 250-300 delta V just to go east, because that's the way Kerbin is already rotating. So that's basically why you go east. Does that mean you have to go east? No. You can go any orbit you want, it's just this is the most efficient orbit, so if you plan to take this orbit elsewhere, it's a good idea to go east. As well with the fact that, like I said before, the moon also rotates anti-clockwise, as does Minmus going anti-clockwise. Meaning because they're all going in the same direction, going in an east anti-clockwise orbit around Kerbin with facing the North Pole, then it makes it easier to encounter the moon and Minmus without having to go in the opposite direction and then canceling out all of that opposite velocity just to get captured. So that's basically why you go east, if you've ever been wondering. Let's see, plenty of fuel in this stage. And we should get our orbit. Now the first stage to going to the moon is getting an orbit. Of course, we're not going to be landing on the moon just yet, or really orbiting. We're just going to do a flyby, which is our method of getting science. And the first stage is just get to orbit. So you can see we are technically now in an orbit. Now the next thing you want to do is set the moon as your target. Now these are where we have actually a little bit of the patched conics that I was talking about last episode. It's these things, as well as the fact we can use maneuver nodes. So if we left click and say add maneuver, you can make a maneuver node. And I'll actually make one of these in a bit. And this is basically what patched conics gives you the ability to do. If you do not upgrade your tracking station, you won't have them. You can left click and you go, why can't I make a maneuver node? You just need to go spend the 75,000 on upgrading your tracking station. That's it. Now, a trick with the moon. If again, you go looking straight down at Kerbin's North Pole, and you look, and you draw this horizontal line, basically set the moon to the very right, and then click on the orbit below Kerbin. So you can see we have the orbit that is at the bottom of Kerbin with the moon to our right, and all you have to do is pull prograde. Now, prograde on the maneuver node makes your orbit go faster, basically. And if you look, just doing this, we get an encounter. That's because about the time it's going to take us to go up is about the same time it takes the moon to go. So this is basically a shortcut. Now you can get orbits other ways, and I'm actually going to make this a little bit better by moving it some. And I'm just going to tweak with this node until I get a free return. Now, here's another feature of the patched conics. If you look, we have, well, the sun's actually right there. Okay, so this is probably the best that I can try and say this. If you look, we have this orange line, which is the predicted trajectory after we do the burn node. And then if you see, we have this purple line that also gives us the moon periapsis, or the lowest point on the moon's orbit. So that means we're going to be encountering the moon as well. And then we get a moon escape, and we get this green line, which is the orbit we will have after we escape the moon. So this is a successful flyby. You can see moon encounter and a moon escape. And then we have, this is what it's going to look like after the node, and then this green orbit is what it's going to look like after we escape the moon. And if you look at this green orbit, it comes right back through Kerbin. And if we tweak with it a little bit, which you can see now, I'm just tweaking with the node, messing with the prograde and retrograde as well as the radial in and out, trying to get it so that my maneuver node intersects with Kerbin's atmosphere again to complete a free return. Which means if we look at our Kerbin periapsis right now, if you can see that, let's zoom in a little. You'll look at this and you will see Kerbin periapsis is at 40 meters. That means we're going to be inside the atmosphere, and we're actually going to be deep enough inside the atmosphere that what's going to happen is we're going to land, basically, somewhere probably over in this desert area, or even possibly on this landmass or somewhere in the water. Now, just from this one node, now this is probably pretty complicated if you're brand new, but from this one node, what we're doing is we are telling it this is the orange path that we're going to follow once we actually do this burn node. And this orange path is going to lead us into a Munar encounter. Now, the Munar encounter is going to lead us into having this purple line, which is basically the trajectory we'll be taking while we're in the moon's sphere of influence, because currently we're in Kerbin's sphere of influence. We'll switch to the moon's sphere of influence, and then we're going to escape the moon, and we're going to hit up on this green path, and we're going to come back to Kerbin as a free return. Now, this is probably the desired method you want for your first time actually going through this, or even easier, not going for a free return but just getting the encounter, but this isn't actually what I want. Now, what I actually want is I wanted to get both sets of science from the moon, meaning I'm not looking exactly for a free return since I overbuilt this craft anyway. What I'm looking to do is bring my moon periapsis as low as I can. So what you're going to see is just me messing with the maneuver nodes to the point where I can actually get my moon's periapsis to be low enough so that I will be able to get the close science when we fly by the moon. Which of course takes me a little bit to tweak just to get it just right for my return, as well as setting it so I can get both sets of data, which means that we're going to go in towards the moon, fly really low to it, and then we're going to be ejected rather high out. However, when we get to about the moon's periapsis, we're going to do another burn that is going to fix our escape of the moon, which is going to put us back into Kerbin's atmosphere. So now that we're at the maneuver node, we're just going to burn, stage out into our final stage, and keep going. Now, the maneuver node isn't perfect, but we have plenty of margin of error on this one, because we have a craft with twice as much delta V as we need. So as you can see, we've done most of the maneuver node, but we haven't really expanded that far. This line will actually exponentially expand faster, so it's only reached about half with like 70 delta V left, until of course you actually get there. So if you notice, the maneuver node also moved, and that's because we burned a little late, and if we just go and face it and we keep burning, it'll kind of give us our correction. Until of course we're down to pretty much nothing. Now, we have all of these in actual real time here, but our periapsis isn't quite right because we did burn a little late. So you can see, now we have our current trajectory, which is the blue path. We have our next trajectory, which is once we hit the moon, we're going to have this orange path, and then once we leave the moon, we'll have the purple one. However, our periapsis is now a little too high, which means what we're going to do is we're going to create a node, anywhere is fine, add another maneuver, and just kind of correct this. So just going to tweak a little bit more with this maneuver node, which totals about 7 delta V change to actually get my periapsis down to about 12,000, which is more acceptable and will actually be able to get us the low Munar science that we want, as well as maybe some biome-specific science. There we go. We have our periapsis, which I'm just going to control a little bit. I'm using just the fact I know if I slow down then I should reduce it, because by speeding up I increased it. So I'm just going to use this manual without a maneuver node, until of course I have it where I want it. And 12,000 should be fine, nice and close. It means we'll guarantee ourselves the low Kerbin science. And then when we actually get to the periapsis, we're going to create another node that's going to give us basically the ability to not accidentally escape Kerbin, which we don't want. So we can actually, if we want to, click on the Munar encounter and say warp here, and then KSP will very kindly warp us until the point our sphere of influence changes. Now you'll notice the blue line, our current trajectory, is wrapping around the moon, and the orange line is starting over here somewhere, which is where we're going to exit. Now it doesn't look like we're going to exit there because we're exiting here, but the moon, if we mouse over, is going to be at that blue dot just south of where the orange line starts. That's where the moon is going to be, which means our escape is going to be right about where the orange line starts. And now that we're in the moon's sphere of influence, we can start our science collection. So let's right-click on the first materials bay, and we can see material study while in space high over the moon. We get 50 science for that. So we'll keep that. We're also going to open up our materials bay, or our service bay, do our goo, which is high over the moon, for 20 science, and we're going to log our temperature, which is another 16 science. As well as those experiments, we also have crew report to do for 10, and we can even pull Bob out really quickly to do an EVA report for 16 more. So currently, we have gathered a whole ton of science, about 100, maybe more. And we're going to do this all again when we're near the moon, which I believe we should get more for, but we might actually get equal amounts. We will just see. So what I'm actually doing right here is just playing with the maneuver node because I am trying to determine what direction I need to burn when I get close to my periapsis, as to get me back to Kerbin, and which burn is going to be more efficient. Now, I know I've been playing a lot with the maneuver nodes, and I haven't been talking a whole lot about them necessarily in this episode. We will talk more about them when we actually do encounters, which we're going to be doing in the next episode, where we're encountering with 3 stranded Kerbals in Kerbin's orbit, and we'll talk a little bit about maneuver nodes. But if you guys want me to do some very specific maneuver node video where I just go specifically over them, kind of a tutorial for that one concept, just let me know and I'll see if I can do it. So we have our first actual science from near the moon. As you can see, temperature scan while near the moon. We'll keep that data and of course do all the other science experiments too. Now we are getting more science when we're near the moon. Last time we got 20, now we're getting 30. And last time we got 50 on the materials bay, and this time we're going to grab 75. So we do get a decent bit more. We can do another crew report. Nice and easy for 15. And pull Bob out again for another EVA report. Now the EVA reports, you don't actually get one near the moon, you get one over moon's biomes. So if we keep the data for that and we store it, then it's possible, just like what we did with Kerbin, we can actually grab some of these from different biomes. Now it's a bit harder to tell where all the biomes are on the moon, but it definitely looks like there's a crater up there that we might be able to get. So we're just going to keep Bob out here and see if we can't snag another one, because these are worth 24, which is 3 times more than Kerbin's biomes. However, we're only doing a flyby, we're not actually in a full stable orbit. Now, unfortunately, I do not actually get any other biomes on this flyby. I'm guessing I just got an unlucky encounter where the way I was flying by, all I ever met was the Midlands. Even that darker area that I thought was a crater, turns out that I was only able to grab Midlands while I flew over it. So unfortunately, we'll only be bringing back 24 science for the EVA reports. So I'll just give it one more try. Nope. Okay, we're just going to give up with that. I guess we're not going to get anything past Midlands. We did collect lots of science though, so that's good. And now it's time to actually start kind of worrying about what's going to happen. So let's add a maneuver here. And the first order of business I want to do is actually just slow down. Because what slowing down is going to do is it's going to make it so that we don't escape Kerbin. So my goal is to actually keep the periapsis past where we escape the moon, because if we burn at periapsis it'll be more efficient, versus if we go too far then the periapsis will actually go past our node, in which case we won't be quite as efficient. Even though burning when we're here is more efficient, it probably wouldn't make much of a difference in the long run. But that's just how I'm going to do it. So we got our maneuver node, and I'm just going to assume basically that we're close enough in this orbit. Now don't worry about that, we're actually rising, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. And I know we burned early, but I just needed the general direction. Actually, because we burned early, our periapsis is way back there. Alright, that shouldn't be an issue. Now, we're just going to kind of fly out and escape the moon. And once we do that, we should be fine to just land here on Kerbin. Now, because like I said, I wanted my periapsis out, I'm just going to do another... Actually, that's probably just a waste of delta V, to be honest. Let's just time accelerate and leave the moon. Now, one thing that's nice about Kerbal Space Program that was incorporated in 1.0 is that it will automatically slow down your time acceleration when you come to one of these SIO changes, Sphere of Influence. As you can see, we automatically went down to 50 to do the change. And now we're actually going to drop it down to nothing. Now, just from looking at this orbit, I can tell that I'm going to need to burn both retrograde to slow my orbit down, and radial out to force my periapsis in. Now, even though burning radial out will force my apoapsis further away, it'll also, because my apoapsis is moving further away, force my periapsis to move closer to the planet. So, knowing how to manipulate maneuver nodes is really helpful. They basically push velocity in the direction they're pointing. But what I was doing is I was slowing down my velocity, and I was pushing radial out, because radial out would basically make my apoapsis move towards me. And if my apoapsis is, say, right in this general area, making it move towards me forces my periapsis to move in the same direction down the orbital line, which, because my periapsis is over here, what happens is when I push my apoapsis toward me, the periapsis is forced to move outwards to stay on opposite sides of the orbit. And because of this, by slowing down, I pushed my periapsis basically out here, and then I slowed down, making it go closer to Kerbin, which is why it's now there. Similar to me having my apoapsis, I basically moved that towards me, where it would sit up here, but then I slowed down, which pushed it inwards closer to Kerbin as well. So basically knowing how to manipulate these nodes, and I'll be doing this a lot, and you definitely need to learn how to use them, because they're very helpful in determining what you need to do for basically all-in-one burns, because doing your burns all together is more efficient than having to do many burns. Although there are situations where you're going to need to do more than one burn, and that just can't be helped. So of course, we're just going to follow through with our burn, changing our orbit to the new orbit that is going to bring us back to Kerbin's atmosphere, in which case the atmosphere will slow us down and catch us, which is why we don't actually need to complete this orbit, we just need to get it under the atmosphere. Now, just to mention, looking at this, because I can see it right now, if you look, in order to slow down towards Kerbin, we need to basically burn clockwise, because that's currently the way we're heading. Currently, if you look at our orbit, it's anti-clockwise, so to slow down, we need to burn basically to the left of our current orientation. So if I face prograde, which is my current velocity direction, which if you look is to the left, then I can actually reduce my periapsis just by burning this way. Even in the moon's encounter, simply because this is how the orbit works. So because I'm actually burning to the left, we're making our periapsis go down a little bit, simply because that's reverse compared to our orbit. So now with our burn done, we're just going to casually fall back toward Kerbin. And of course, be wary not to time accelerate through your periapsis, otherwise bad things will happen. Now, we have only parachutes and a heat shield on these two command modules. We don't have any for our science that we gathered. So how do we plan to bring this back? Well, let's actually grab Bob, pull him out, and tell him to, well, gather our science. Now we keep Valentina in there because she is going to hold the SAS on, so if we accidentally bump this, it won't start spinning out of control. And we're going to collect the data. Now, because Bob is a scientist here, he can actually reset the experiments to restore them so that we can use them again. However, there's no need because we brought 2 of each. So we don't actually need to reset it, we just need to collect the data. So we'll take the data from all of our parts. That way we can return it without the need of actually bringing the parts back. So you can bring the parts back if you wish, and when you bring the parts back, then you will of course gather the science for them, or you can pull them out of the part, and basically we currently are holding 6 experiments, and we can store them in the crew capsule by boarding it. So we'll grab on, we will board, we stored all of the science experiments, and now we no longer need this bottom stage because it's done everything it can. Now, I was kind of suspicious of that. We actually are getting a science high over Kerbin instead of low over Kerbin, which is what we got from the basic orbit. So because we reset it, we can actually grab one more experiment, which is the high over Kerbal, because I remembered we didn't do it yet. And because we hadn't done it yet, that also tells me one more thing. We can do it for the other experiments. So having a scientist is actually going to be really good. Let's remove the data. Let's go down here. Restore that. Let's observe it. Because scientists can observe the experiment while they're on EVA. Only scientists can do this. High over Kerbal, we'll keep that. We'll even log the temperature. High over Kerbal again, we'll keep it. And I believe we should also be able to do an EVA report. High over Kerbal for another 12. So we're going to be landing with a ton of science for this mission. So we will just grab on. We're actually going to take all of the data and then store it all. And of course we could have just jumped back in instead of saying store it. But now we can do a crew report. High over Kerbal for 7.5 more. A very nice amount farmed so far. And of course now we can drop off all these science parts because we've used them for everything they are good for, which means that them burning up or crashing and breaking aren't too much concern now that they no longer have any valuable science in them. And with that, we will just be accelerating the video as to save time, since we are already past the cap that I said these videos would take on time. I'm really good at keeping that. Anyhow, since we are already there, we're just going to time accelerate through the last little bit, burn off the rest of our liquid fuel as to slow our re-entry a little bit. It's only about 300 meters per second that we change, but that's still a decent amount. And we're going to keep the bottom stage just until it starts making us lose control. So as you saw, once it made us lose control, we dropped it because it was no longer useful to us. The only reason we had kept it is because it gave us a little bit additional drag, meaning we'd slow down faster and have to use the heat shield less and or take less damage, I suppose. But once we started losing control, it just became basically a liability. And you can see it back there, just exit physics load range, in which case it disappears. And then of course we slowed down plenty much, only having actually burned about 50 ablator with the chutes out, and it's just the exact same landing as previously, where we use our chutes and we slowly fall to the ground. Now you only really need to use heat shields, like I believe I've said, for re-entries above 2 kilometers per second, because the normal orbit of Kerbal, where you're just over 2 kilometers per second, usually that's not enough to destroy command modules. 349 science. I feel as though we should have earned one more just for the even 350, but I'm not going to complain too much. So we earned a ton of science from all of the experiments we did and all of the farming we did. We got, of course, tiny amount. That was a 30,000 funds craft. We got 2,000 back. Not awful. Bob got 4 experience, so did Valentina, which means they're both leveled up to level 1, which is really good. And now we have a huge cache of science we can spend, as well as, of course, we did complete this contract, which gave us some funds back, along with science and rep. So, I thank you all for watching episode 2 of this mostly stock career mode. I'm PTT GRW, signing out.